Hello and welcome everybody. This is our second Learning Thursdays event. Actually, the first one that is formally, we actually did one last week where we had an introduction to IPv6 training that went very, very well. And with me here, I actually have Joseph and Brosen. And Brosen is actually going to go over today and talk about an introduction to wireless assessment and wireless networking. But before we do that, I want to actually do a couple of announcements. And with Joseph in here, we're going to have this series of events every Thursday at the same time at 7 p.m. Eastern time or 11 p.m. UTC time. We were trying to actually get time that will work for everybody. And unfortunately, that's close to impossible. So we decided into 7 p.m. Eastern. Of course, it's going to be always in YouTube and Twitch, and we're actually streaming to a whole bunch of different channels. We're streaming to the Red Team Village, to Grey Hat, and also Texas Cyber Summit. So this is a combined event between all those entities. And as a matter of fact, throughout time, we're actually going to get other collaborations with other entities in the industry. So it's an amazing community. So the way that you can get a lot of information about what are the upcoming events, of course, is in our website. Right now, I'm actually sharing the Learning Thursdays website, which is redteamvillage.io/Thursdays, just to make it easy. And again, today, we're actually starting with the introduction to wireless and networks with DRB1 or Brosen. And next week, we will have Philip Wiley going over different ethical hacking techniques and different procedures and that.
And fantastic, right?
More information. Yeah. A little bit more information about that talk in the next few days. And then on April 1st, we have a pretty amazing talk related to memory forensics with kernel level ASLR. So how to actually bypass ASLR and potentially do forensics in that perspective. Now, if you think that you have a topic that you would like to present, this is a community event. Of course, we have a link in the main site that if you want to actually give a presentation, you can submit your talk in here. As a matter of fact, as soon as I actually opened this yesterday, we already got a couple of talks that we're actually evaluating and will be announced in the next few days or so. Another thing that I want to actually draw your attention is, of course, our next event, which is the Hacking is Not a Crime HackerCon. And we came up with this corny name, just HackerCon. But we have an amazing lineup of speakers. If you actually scroll down in the website and you click on Hacking is Not a Crime, you see actually a plethora of very well-known presenters in the industry. So tons and tons of events, and I'm going to pass it now to Joseph to talk about the Mayhem event and other things. We're going to be representing RSA and of course the upcoming DEF CON and so on.
Hey, thank you, Omar, and welcome to our Learning Thursdays. We're trying to figure out a name to call this event that we're planning on doing every Thursday for the next couple of months. The reason we're doing that is because we want to give back to the community. And some of these talks that we're going to give are going to be very introductory, and some of them are going to be mid-level and some will be advanced. So if some of the stuff that we are going to present is a little bit too advanced for you, I suggest you still stick it out and follow along with it, because You never know what you're going to learn from any of the presenters. Even if you walk away with one new concept or idea, it's worth your time. Most of the events, most of these talks on Thursdays are going to be 2 hours. If we have a presenter that's only doing 1 hour, we may have two presenters. We're also going to fill in some time with talking about events and also letting you know about other events that are coming up and events maybe that we're not even doing, but that we think are important to the community. We're definitely going to point those out. So as Omar mentioned, we have a couple events coming up. If you take a look at our at the Red Team Village website, there's a timeline. The next event we have coming up after HackerCon is the RSA conference. The Red Team Village will be there on Monday. But the rest of the week, we're actually going to be streaming some talks. So you'll be able to pick up a few talks every day on the Red Team Village Twitch and YouTube channel. And our RSA, we're going to be running a capture the flag. We're going to have some demos. We'll have a lot of lightning talks as well as some panel discussions. So stay tuned for all of those. Those will be posted here soon. And then in May, I think it's May 28th or something like that. What's the date of Mayhem? May 29th. So last year, those of you that attended Mayhem know that we brought some amazing speakers and content. We're planning on doing the same thing again this May. Our call for papers is open right now. So if you're interested in speaking, be sure to fill that out and get back to us and we'll review it and let you know. Mayhem originally started so that we could, provide the community with some really high quality speakers, those that have been in the industry forever and know just about everything you can know about a specific topic. And we're trying to do the same thing again this year, so you can expect some really good content. And then also we want to make sure that we open it up for those in the community that are new to speaking and want to have an opportunity to speak. So that's why our call for papers is open, so that whatever your level, whatever your talk is about, preferably red teamish in nature, submit it and we'll review it and hopefully we'll get you on the agenda. I think last year we ran 24 hours straight on that one, or did we do 12 hours?
24 hours.
24 hours straight, yeah. From
that was the goal, and we end up doing like 38 hours or something like that.
Yeah, so submit your talk. You may not get prime time, but you'll definitely get some exposure. The other event after Mayhem is going to be DEF CON. I'm not involved in that this year, but Omar's going to be leading that with a really great team of people. Then after DEF CON, we have the Texas Cyber Summit, which will be in at the end of October 29th and 30th. It's going to be live with limited audience, and it'll also be virtual like last year. I think last year we had something like 8,000 people attend it. So I know the date on the website says October 1st and 2nd, but the real dates are October 29th and 30th over, near Halloween. That's kind of like the time we like to host that event anyway. The next event is the Gray Hat event that will be taking place in Orlando, Florida. That will be a really big event. Over 1,000 people will be able to attend that one. It's going to be the weekend of November 4th through 6th. Both of these events have pre-con training the week before. So like in November, it's going to be like November 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th will be the training, the hands-on training. All of these trainings lead to certification, so check them out. They'll be posted soon on both the Texas Cyber Summit and the Gray Hat site. And then after Gray Hat, I think we're going to be like too tired to do anything else.
We always say that, and there's another event coming, popping up anywhere.
Exactly. No, we're always willing to help other events. If any event wants to have the Red Team Village or Omar and I speak, or someone from our village speak, get in contact with us. We try to help out the community as much as possible. For us, it's really about the community, giving back to the community and doing as much as we can to help the community. We understand that, as old guys like Omar and I are, at the top of our game, there's up and coming people, and we want to help them so that they can, replace us when we go and retire. So
speak for yourself.
Thanks.
So, joking aside, one of the things that Joseph mentioned, but I want to highlight, is that we're focusing a lot in training and education versus, just random events, etc. Right? So, and we have had some track of very successful things around workshops, and we call stations, which are something that we actually
if you go into trainings, you can click on that. It's under trainings, and then hands-on labs.
Yep. And we started actually doing this, these type of stations and workshops, in the Red Team Village whenever, of course, we were on site. And last year it just grew tremendously, and in Grey Hat was extremely successful. And not only the stations, we had the workshops, and some of them actually were 4-hour workshops, some of them were 2-hour workshops.
Yeah,
these are trainings that you will probably pay $2,500, $3,000 a piece, and we were giving them pretty much for free, most of them, right? And in the Red Team Village, basically everything that we're doing is, of course, free of charge. So with that said, I think that what you're here for is not for us, but for the presentation from Bronson. So once again, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you supporting the Red Team Village and actually all the community here. So with that said, if you don't mind, I'll pass it back to you, and you can take it away. We're actually doing this over Zoom, so you can share your screen and start the presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Omar. And again, thank you for reaching out and allowing me to present today. So let me get up our PowerPoint here. This was shamelessly stolen from your website. So I hope that's okay.
Absolutely.
Yep, that's what it's there for.
I was working on this up until the time, kind of making tweaks to it. But as you mentioned, my name is DRB1. I work for Optiv as a penetration tester on the attack and pen team. Wireless penetration testing is kind of it's my hobby, my side project. It's something that I really like doing, and we'll get some plugs for the what was formerly known as the Wireless Village a little bit later. But I highly recommend everyone at least get into Wi-Fi testing. There's a lot of opportunity there, and a lot of new research that's being done. So for the agenda, we're going to go over what is Wi-Fi. So we're going to talk a little bit about what it is, what's going on a little bit under the hood. And again, this is kind of at a 10,000 foot level. I mean, we're going to talk about a lot of different concepts, but I'm going to try to keep them as high level as possible, so it's more accessible to those who are just getting into it. Why Wi-Fi? So why do we care about Wi-Fi? We'll dive a little bit into that. The standards themselves. There are multiple standards. You guys may have seen 802.11x coming out recently. There's a few client devices, obviously many more enterprise AP products out there that support it, but it is coming. Authentication. So we'll talk a little bit about how the authentication methods work. Specifically, we're going to talk about WPA2. We're going to look at PSK, pre-shared key, and EAT methods. So we'll look at those, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the 802.11 attacks. We're going to focus mostly on WPA2, just to give an introduction. And then we'll talk a little bit about WPA3 in advanced open and what the future is. So what is Wi-Fi? Wireless is not equal to Wi-Fi. So this is something that the Wireless Village, which is now known as the RF Hacker Sanctuary, is really championing. And there's a lot of things that fall into the wireless spectrum, and it's not just about Wi-Fi testing anymore these days. There's a whole slew of different things that you can investigate. Again, we're going to talk about Wi-Fi for pretty much the entire time here, but definitely if you have any questions, let me know. afterwards. But it is part of the electromagnetic spectrum. The majority of protocols operate in the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz range, and you can kind of see that electromagnetic spectrum down there below. Obviously, wavelength frequency adjust as you move up and down that scale, but we kind of fall into the 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz bands for Wi-Fi. So why do we care? Why do we care about Wi-Fi? Most people are familiar with it, and it's generally the most convenient way to access networks. So for companies, it's pretty easy to set up. It can be very secure depending on the configuration. Configuration, like many other areas in testing, is probably the largest single source of vulnerabilities. Is not necessarily a vulnerability, but misconfigurations. Enterprise networks can be used to ensure only authorized users can connect. This prevents dictionary or brute force attacks, which are pretty common with PSK networks, but it does present an additional attack surface. So if the vast majority of the time that you run into an enterprise network, you're going to run into Active Directory as well. That's usually the radius authentication that's being used. And so with that, if you do manage to get credentials through downgrade attacks, things like that, you now have clear text credentials for the network. If you have a drop device or any other method, if the VPN doesn't have 2FA, for instance, you can get a foothold right there. So the Wi-Fi standards, we have Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E, which are the newest ones. And you'll notice the maximum link right there is about 600 to 9608 megabits a second. We should all be familiar with 802.11ac or at least 802.11n. Those speeds you're never going to see on any of your devices, but that is the theoretical maximum. And it's mainly related to channel bandwidths, the number of antennas, radios. We'll get into that a little bit later. But as you can see, Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 6E were adopted just last year, so they are starting to come out, and we should be seeing a lot more client devices this year. Notice the differences in speed as well. So if you look at the original 802.11, I mean, it was 1 to 2 megabits. It was only 2.4 gigahertz. The A band, which if you've used Kismet before and you're specifying different bands, you'll do ABG usually to cover all of those. That added additional speed, obviously, but without the 2.4 gigahertz, it ends up having more range, whereas the 5 gigahertz has a greater capacity for speed. So 2.4 penetrates walls and things like that a little bit better. So knowing these standards is going to assist you in finding and testing wireless networks. Why is that? Well, there's many reasons, but one of the main reasons is read your wireless card specifications carefully. Just because your Panda says that it does 802.11ac doesn't mean that it natively supports it. So we ran into this actually recently where there were some bands that were added with 802.11ac, but were not in the 802.11n standard. And we were wondering, hey, what's going on? Why aren't we able to, we're able to see the traffic. We're not able to do anything with it. It's because those Pandas don't support 802.11ac, even though they say it all over the packaging. If you look at the actual specs, it's just using 802.11n as a fallback. If you're using a 2.4 gigahertz card, we're looking at Ugreen alphas. You're not going to see any 5 gigahertz networks. So you have to make sure that your hardware is capable of doing what you need it to do. And again, at a minimum, the card you're using needs to support packet injection. So most of the attacks that you're going to perform are going to require that. 802.11ac only networks are becoming more common. As I said, 802.11ax, I mean, the standard itself has been adopted. Companies are probably going to be very slow to implement that, but effectively it doesn't change a whole lot. WPA3 does, though. We'll get into that a little bit later. So these are the 2.4 gigahertz channels. If you've ever dove into wireless access point and looked at the configuration, this is probably one of the first places that you looked. There are plenty of spectrum analyzers out there where you can take a look at, what the local signals are in those band ranges, but you'll notice that these channel widths are 22 megahertz per the 802.11b specification. Most of the time they're referred to as like 20, but you can see they're centered in specific places. So it's a busy graph, but you can kind of see the solid lines, the solid semicircles there for 1, 6, and 11. And the reason why those are kind of colored differently from the others are those are kind of the clean bands. Those are the bands where you're not going to have any overlap with any other neighboring bands, right? So you look at like band 5, or channel 5. Channel 5 overlaps into 6. It also touches 4 and 3 and 7. So 1, 6, and 11 are usually going to be your go-tos. Another thing to note as well, if you are setting this up on your own, make sure that you are setting up your APs on different channels, because otherwise you will get worse signal rather than better. But this is what a spectrum analyzer graph looks like. You can see there, this was taken where there's not a lot of wireless networks, so it's kind of a clean view. And you'll see that there's one band that's centered on channel 1 and another band that's centered on channel 6. And there's some minimal overlap, but in reality, there's really not much. But we could also have another wireless network on 11, and it wouldn't be a problem. But most of the time when you're looking at wireless networks, you're at least at 2.4, you're going to see 1, 6, or 11. So let's talk a little bit about 802.11n. This was the original specification that was brought out. This is, like I said, for the pandas, the fallback for the 5 gigahertz range. There's different modes on the side there, and we talked a little bit about 22 megahertz bandwidth. With 802.11n, you can actually have 20 or 40. Now, the client has to support it, and the AP has to support it, so both the station and the AP. But it does increase your speed, but it can cause issues if you have devices that do not support it. You'll also notice the 1x1s on the side and the 2x2s. That's how many antennas are transmitting, receiving. And you can see the arrangement on the far right there. 1 transmit, 1 receive. The max speed at 20 megahertz is 72. We bump it up to 40 megahertz. Pretty predictably, it's about double. So if we move down to the 2x2 at 20, it is exactly double of the 1x1, which again, we would expect, and roughly the same doubling going on to the 40 megahertz, and so on and so forth as you go down. Pretty much linear. 802.11ac was the next standard. So you can see here that 802.11ac supports up to 160 megahertz bandwidth. Again, this is going to allow you to have faster speeds, but it may not be compatible with certain devices. Not a large number of devices that support 160, but and again, doubling the amount of antenna doubles the theoretical maximum rate. And again, this has to be on both ends. So if your access point, for instance, has 4, it's like a 4x4, right? 4 transmit, 4 receive. Unless your iPhone or MacBook or whatever the case may be, unless it has that number of antenna, it's not going to achieve that speed. So that's usually why you'll see, I think max usually cap out around 300 megabits a second on wireless connections, at least for 40 megahertz. But yeah, much faster than the old 802.11n. You can see, I mean, the max speed with 3x3 was 450, and I mean, that's pretty much eclipsed by a single transmit and receive at 80. So now we move on to 802.11ax. So this is the new standard. I don't have anything here for what they're calling Wi-Fi, because originally it was 802.11 and then multiple specifications. Now they've simplified it to Wi-Fi 4, 5, 6, and that's kind of how the Wi-Fi Alliance is going to move forward. Wi-Fi 6 has been certified, and I believe 6E has been as well. 6E is supposedly going to be in the 6 gigahertz band. Haven't had a chance to really play around with that yet, but should be interesting once it comes out. So this is based off of the 5 gigahertz, and again we see the same things here. Bandwidths from 20 to 160 megahertz, different numbers of transmit receive antennas, but you can see even with a 2x2 at 40, we're already capping out almost over a little bit over 100 megabits higher than we were with 802.11n. And the theoretical maximum, at least on this table, is 2.4 gigabits. I don't remember off the top of my head what the theoretical maximum, the absolute is. So 5 gigahertz channels. There's a lot more. That's the easiest way to explain it, and it's one of the benefits of 5 gigahertz. So you can see here all the different channels that we have. Some of them are DFS, some are weather radar, but the channel widths are kind of broken down there, and you can kind of see, hey, we've got 20 megahertz channel widths. There's a lot more choices. As you step up, and especially once you get down to the 160 megahertz, you only have 2 choices. So you start running into the problem that you had with 2.4. If you're in a crowded environment, it's going to be hard to find an area to get that clean signal. And this is what a spectrum analyzer looks like for the 5 gigahertz. Again, pretty clean. There's not a lot of signals coming in on this, and you can see most of them are isolated pretty well. And again, this is a free iPhone program. There's plenty of spectrum analyzers that you can download for free if you're curious just to see what's in your neighborhood, or if you're, maybe you're trying to set up your Wi-Fi network. You want to know what channels your neighbors are running their Wi-Fi on. You can avoid those. Okay, so that was a lot of information, a lot of numbers. How is it all useful? So we know which bands we're looking at, and we also need to determine what channels we're looking at as far as performing this testing, because when we launch our attacks, obviously we don't want to be hopping around, especially in the 5 gigahertz bands, all the different channels. We want to focus in on our target. Not all tools and adapters will be sufficient to cover all possible cases. Again, we talked about this a little bit earlier. There's plenty of tools out there and a lot of different Wi-Fi adapters. Just do your research. I have a couple listed at the end here. There are others that are better, or that are just as good, or I'm sure there's better ones out there, but just make sure that your card can do what you want it to do. Yeah, not all bands can be assessed. Again, looking at the old alpha cards, the green ones, if you have those, and you're wondering, hey, why am I only seeing channels 1 and 6 and 11? Well, it's probably because it can't pick up the 5 gigahertz. Or some tools don't monitor all frequencies by default. AeroDump NG, you have to pass specific flags to get 5 gigahertz. And this is a little look at what AeroDump looks like. The top of the screen here, you can see the BSSIDs. They're basically MAC addresses, but they're unique for specific APs, and then you can see the power. So the higher the number, so the closer to 0, the stronger the signal is going to be. You'll notice in the top left, we're on channel 12. So obviously this is in the 2.4 gigahertz band. And then to the right of the beacon, or excuse me, to the right of power, you'll see beacons. So you'll see the number of beacons that have gone out, or the ones that you've seen at least. You can see the channels as well. So you'll see 1, 6, 11, no 5 gigahertz channels there. So pretty standard. Most of these are pre-shared keys, but there are a couple under the auth column that you'll see are NGT. So those are going to be your EAP networks. So those are going to be the ones that you're looking at for enterprise credentials. And then the section below is clients. So there are clients, most clients that are out there will beacon on a regular basis for any wireless networks that are within range. So if it knows certain wireless networks, it's going to periodically send out beacons looking for those wireless networks. If you've ever gone to DEF CON and you've left your Wi-Fi on, this is how you got owned. I mean, this is the start, at least, right? Because they're looking, okay, cool. So now I know what network you're looking for. I'll just stand up an evil twin with those details. You'll just come on through me. All right. So the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bands are very easy to differentiate. The wireless adapters in monitor mode, which you have to turn on in order to monitor traffic, rather than just using it as you normally would. They hop between channels, so that's pretty common. You can adjust that depending on the tool that you're using. And knowing your target's channel, again, is essential in performing certain attacks. You need to be on the right channel to get the right results. Kind of think about it as, yeah, that's probably the best way of saying it. So know your tools. Again, that's one of the most important things. Even if your AP supports 8x8 160 megahertz on the new 802.11x, your client will still need to support it as well to fully utilize it. Old green alphas don't support that 5 gigahertz. Pandas are fantastic for most. I do recommend that new alpha, because like I said, I have run into issues where there were services, or excuse me, Wi-Fi networks that were running on those newer bands, and the Panda wasn't able to handle it. So now we'll move on to authentication. So I have all the different versions of wireless authentication here in this table. We have WEP, WPA, WPA2, and WPA3. WEP, we all know WEP is broken and it's awful. Again, shameless plug for the RF Hacker Sanctuary. If you do want to compete in the wireless CTF, there are WEP challenges. Good luck. WEP can be very secure depending on how it is configured. So WEP is kind of a joke until you until you get to one of those challenges. Again, the encryption was RC4. Authentication, open or shared keys. The data integrity was done by a cyclic check, 32-bit, and there's no real key management. That was really the issue, was initialization vectors and the lack of a standard key management. Key management within the standard. WPA was quickly rushed out to fix some of these issues, but at the end of the day ended up having similar problems, specifically with rebuilding those message integrity codes. But it did use the four-way handshake. Very unusual to have ever seen this, because WPA2 came out right afterwards. And it supports CCNP and AES. We have WPA2 Personal, which is your pre-share key, and you have Enterprise. Uses CBC, MAX, based on AES, and a four-way handshake. There are some vulnerabilities in WPA2, and we'll talk a little bit about those. But overall, it's much more secure than the previous two options. WPA3, again, it was announced by the Wi-Fi Alliance, has been certified. We're going to start to see that rolling out. But in practicality, you're probably not going to have to deal with it, simply because until there's widespread adoption of WPA3, they're going to be the access points, at least if you want people to join the network, are going to be in transitional mode. And transitional mode basically says, hey, if you're a client, I'm going to offer you WPA3. If you don't support it, then I'm going to fall back to WPA2. So until that happens, we control the evil twin. Well, we'll just say, hey, connect to us with WPA2, and the clients will. WPA3 has some nice things that come with it. Obviously, mandatory management frame, protected management frames. That's one of the big ones. So no more deauthing. There's a different handshake that goes, a different handshake method, simultaneous authentication of equals. But yeah, those are the main differences. So the four-way handshake. This was started with WPA, and it's pretty straightforward. So you have a station, also known as a client, and you have an access point, or AP. The AP initially sends out a nonce, and once the station has that, it has enough to construct the PTK, which is a pairwise transit key. Yeah, pairwise transit key. And then it sends its own nonce, so another random value plus a message integrity code, back to the AP. The AP then can construct the PTK, and then we'll send back the GTK and Mike, and then the acknowledgement is the final part. Because the way that, at least for pre-shared key, the way that these are constructed, you only need to know one of those nonce values. So once you've captured, I mean, you can have a client and force them to connect to you. You get the nonce from them, and then you can end up rebuilding that hash, or capturing that hash and rebuilding the original password, which is used to derive the pairwise transit key. So the pairwise transit key contains all the information needed to recover the original pre-shared key. This is all academic, so bear with me. But the pairwise transit key and the pairwise master key are directly related. And you can see here, everything that you need are the MAC addresses of the access point and the station, which, obviously you saw that earlier with AeroDump or Kismet or whatever you want to use. The nonces, which on one side you're going to know one of them, and you just need the other side to give you theirs. And then the only thing left that's unknown is basically the PMK, which is derived from the pre-shared key, the password that you share with everyone. So that's kind of how it gets rebuilt. Thank God for Hashcat. Takes care of most of this on its own. But EAP is a little bit different. So EAP doesn't have a four-way handshake. It does, but it's a little bit more complex. This specifically, so TLS tunnels. So your supplicant's going to send an association request to the AP. It's going to start ePOL. It's going to request the identity from the supplicant, and then it's going to pass that over to a Radius server. And again, most of the time, this is going to be domain controllers, right? So it's very easy for a company to manage people's access and grant them access to Wi-Fi using Active Directory and groups and things like that. So typically, that's what you're going to see. From there, there's a SSL tunnel, TLS tunnel. The access challenge will be passed to the authenticator, which will then request credentials, at least for TTLS or PEEP. And then it will respond obviously with those credentials and then pass them back to the Radius server. Radius server is going to then say yes or no, and then it passes that back to the client, and then keying continues from there. So this is the vast majority of wireless networks that you're going to see when you're performing assessments. Typically, you're only going to see pre-shared keys with guest networks. If there is a corporate network with access to corporate assets with pre-shared keys, definitely talk to the customer about that, or whoever you're performing it for. And you cannot calculate authentication values by capturing handshake packets. So EAP is not, we're not going to be deauthing and capturing association packets and reversing the password. But good news for us, evil twin attacks are fairly effective. Most users will accept arbitrary certificates. Again, server certificate validation is, it depends on the company, but a lot of times the endpoint devices, the BYOD devices, are not configured to verify that the end server is indeed who it is. And on top of that, a lot of phones give you the option to just override it. And most people that are going to the office are just going to be like, hey, I need to get my internet. I don't care, whatever. Yes. And again, very common for companies to use AD as that Radius service. WPA, WEP, touch on these just really quickly. Both are deprecated. Again, WEP ran into issues with IVs primarily. Obviously, the key scheduling was an issue too. WPA improved, but still utilized that RC4 encryption mechanism to maintain backward compatibility. So that's one of the reasons why WPA2 was adopted fairly quickly. And as far as WEP and WPA attacks, they're actually pretty closely related, but we're not going to go into too much detail because you're likely never going to see these. So the abbreviations at the top are the people who discovered them. So it's their first letter of their last name, and I can't remember them off the top of my head. But these are definitely up on Wikipedia and several other places. But basically the first attack on WEP, you would send packets to the AP and would collect those, and you would look for the initialization vectors. Once you had collected between 250,000 and 101.5 million of them, which you could do relatively quickly, you could be able to recover the key for that network. There was another update to that improved 95% key recovery with a probability at 85,000 frames. So much less, much quicker attack. And then we have the ARP request relay. So ARP requests from associated clients in this relay attack are relayed to the AP to send it to force it to send out more packets, which means more initialization vectors. So it makes the above attacks much faster. And then chop was a little bit different. Bytes are basically removed and the packet gets reconstructed and submitted until the AP accepts it, and it's done kind of byte by byte. If you want to look at it, it's kind of cool the way that it works, but it's very hard to explain concisely. WPA, packet spoofing and decryption was possible with an adaptation of chop, so similar deal, except with that it was a message integrity code rather than a CRC. And then no more, that was WPA TKIP. It allowed packet decryption and injection. Again, you probably never use these, more for your information, but this is where we came from. So we'll move on to WPA2. So what attacks can we do with WPA2? So we can do passive listening. We can do key recovery. We can stand up evil twins, and we can also stand up captive portals to capture credentials with those evil twins. Passive listening can be performed to gather useful information. Again, you don't have to associate with any networks to find all of this information. Hidden networks, client beacons, unencrypted traffic, usernames, authentication protocols in use, that sort of thing. Those are all useful pieces of information to build on further attacks. Key recovery, WEP and WPA are both vulnerable to this. You find your target network, you send out some deauthentication frames, and then you monitor the management frames for handshakes. So that four-way handshake we talked about a little earlier. Once you force a client with that deauthentication frame, say, hey, get off the network, it's going to find the network again and attempt to reconnect. Once that handshake goes through, you can capture that, and that's what you use to perform that offline dictionary attack. So 2 wireless adapters are needed to perform the attack. One is used to send the deauthentication frame, so that one needs to have injection capabilities. The second one will be used to capture the handshake when clients attempt to reconnect. Kismet and AeroDump NG are commonly used to capture packets. I'm sure there's other tools out there, but those are the ones that I typically see. Once acquired, AirCrack NG or Hashcat can be used to recover the key. AirCrack probably better if you're on your own, or if you have a decent graphics card or access to a cracking rig, Hashcat's going to be the way to go. You do have to, depending on the tool that you're using, you will have to change it to the right format for Hashcat, but it's pretty straightforward. So this is basically a quick and dirty explanation of how you could go about performing one of these attacks. There are other ways to do it. There may be some errors in here as far as mistyping goes, but obviously you can look up your the documentation if I misspelled one of the flags here. Most of this is coming from memory. Airmon NG check kill. For the handshake collection setup, you want to check kill. That kills any processes that interfere with Airmon NG. Particularly, you're looking at Network Manager. That's going to automatically restart that in non-monitor mode. So if you kill that, then you can keep it in monitor mode and you can continue to monitor traffic. Airmon NG start interface will put that interface into monitor mode. So once you've killed all the processes that are going to mess with it, stand it up into monitor mode. Then AeroDump NG with the interface, it will start capturing packets on whatever interface that is. Obviously, you want to specify the one that you have set up in monitor mode. And once you have identified the network and some of the information, so you see like BSSID, channel, things like that, and then the W flag to write that out to a file. This will basically stand up AeroDump, but it will focus on that specific channel. And like I said before, typically your wireless adapters are hopping through different channels by default when you're in monitor mode. So once you lock into a certain channel, you're not going to be worried about missing maybe one of those four-way handshakes while your adapter's bouncing around. Deauthentication setup. So wireless adapter number 2, you're just going to start Airmon NG on that interface because you've already done a check kill. And then Air Replay NG. So the configuration here, obviously you're going to need BSSID, client's MAC address, and your interface. You can omit TIC-C to just deauth everyone. That's your call. I typically like doing more targeted, but it's your it's your call. It's your test. PSK recovery. Once we do that deauthentication, we should, on our wireless adapter number 1 in Kismet or AeroDump, we should see at the top of the screen, something will flash, say, handshake captured. Once that handshake has been captured, that file that you wrote out to can be used with a word list with AirCrack NG to run through the word list and see if the handshake that you captured matches any of those words. If you do want to use Hashcat, you'll have to download the Hashcat utils. It'll convert the cap files to HCC APX. And then you can use cap to HCCX, blah, 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 HCCAPX.bin to change it from one to the other. So pretty straightforward. And then once you have that, then you just pump that into a Hashcat, pretty similar to what you would do with any other hashes. So from there, we'll talk a little bit about the EAP attacks. Evil twin attacks are technically, they can be used for both. It's kind of the bread and butter in non-COVID times. Obviously due to COVID, not a lot of on-site wireless going on, but it will be returning soon. It is a client attack. So you stand up an evil twin with the same characteristics of a valid network. The client will connect to it. And it can be used with both PSK and EAP. With PSK, the captured part of the handshake will be enough to recover the key. If you have the right EAP methods in place in the correct configuration, you'll gain access to those credentials. So these are actually a little bit easier. And this example is just for a basic like EAP PEEP attack. So the first thing you want to do, generate your certificate. EAP requires certificates. You want to make it look somewhat real. The client's probably going to get a message if they're validating, hey, this is a unknown or untrusted certificate. But like I said, most people are just going to blast through it. So if you make it look somewhat real, most people are going to accept it and just assume that, you know, IT is changing something or whatever. From there, you can use, oh, and I should mention too, EPAMR was written by Solstice. A friend of mine, I really like the tool, so check that out. You can also use Host. I don't have it in here, but Host APD, Mana, they both have their own strengths and weaknesses, so kind of bounce between those two. But it's pretty straightforward. Once you generate that cert, all you have to do is stand up an evil twin with the one-liner for EPAMR, BSSID, ESSID, channel, WPA2, auth, WPA EAP, specify the interface, and then throw the creds flag in there. If anybody joins, you will get those credentials, and then you can use ASLeap with the challenge and response in a word list to recover clear text credentials from the information that EPAMR is going to give you. So again, this is pretty straightforward. You can see here, EPAMR example. This was, yeah. So you can see auth, PEEP, interface, WLAN 0, creds at the end, and looks like we're on channel 2, so it's 2.4 gigahertz band. And you have a client that connects, you have the challenge and response, and you just, again, plug that in here with a word list, and you'll be able to recover those clear text credentials. Captive portal, this one is EAP primarily. Well, you could really use it with both, but usually you're going to use it again with EAP. You can perform passive listening to identify targets. That's first step. Second step, generate your certificate just like you did previously. You want to clone the target portal though. You want the captive portal to look similar to the one that your customer is using. Can be done with wget or a tool like HTTrack, whatever your favorite is. Just grab that portal and then ensure the target portal is in the local var www HTML directory, because that's where EPAMR is going to pull from. So from there, You'll set your BSSID, similar to all the others, ESSID channel interface, and then specify captive portal. By default, this attack captures both credentials and keystrokes. So you can get those back in clear text pretty easily. In implementations that require mutual authentication, you will need valid Radius credentials. So that is a caveat. So that was pretty much it for WPA2. We're going to talk a little bit about WPA3, which is the future. So this leverages simultaneous authentication of equals in lieu of PSK. It is simplified, and it means both the AP and the station will have to in a simplified manner, it means that the AP and the station will have to authenticate to each other with data not derived from the shared secret to prove who they are. It's kind of neat how this is done, but it is a bit of a deep dive. So if you want to take a look at it, definitely look into it. It reduces the success of dictionary attacks and provides forward secrecy. You're not going to be able to do anything from your end unless you're able to emulate frames similar to what they're sending back and forth. I think the limit to password guessing is, if I remember correctly, it's each frame that gets sent, that's one attempt that you can one password attempt that you can put in, at least attempting to authenticate. It supports protected management frames. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but WPA2 does support protected management frames. Again, the problem that you run into a lot of times is clients may or may not support that. So there's a lot of access points out there where you can enable protected management frames. But this is the standard with WPA3, so any deauth attacks are not going to work anymore. And then we have opportunistic wireless encryption. So OWE, this is basically the new open network. It seeks to improve on wireless security by encrypting traffic between the client and AP. Easy way to think about it is HTTPS versus HTTP. Unfortunately, initial research shows it solves the wrong problems with current open wireless networks. So while it secures your connection to the AP, it still doesn't change any of the attacks that you can perform on an open network today. There's a great talk at the RF Hacker Sanctuary that was delivered by Solstice and White Shadow. Definitely take a look at that if you're interested. And a shameless plug. So check out the RF Hacker Sanctuary, wirelessvillage.ninja. I have learned so much just participating in the wireless CTF and all kinds of learning experiences. I got to work directly with Mike Osman with a challenge using the Hack RF1. It was pretty cool. So tons of things that you can learn there. They have 6LoWPAN, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, they have fox hunts. I mean, all kinds of fun stuff that goes on during those tournaments. And I always have a blast. So if you ever get a chance, definitely highly recommend it. Even if you're brand new, grab some gear, go in there and ask questions. Most of the people are going to be more than willing to help you out. And that's pretty much it. So if there's any questions, we can post them up. You can DM me on Twitter if you got something specific that you want to ask. But that's pretty much it. And I just want to again say thank you to the Red Team Village for allowing me to present today.
Quite the opposite. Thank you. So there were a couple of questions. Actually, one came through Twitch, one came through YouTube, if you don't mind. And
Sure.
That should be pretty straightforward. So the first one is actually, I think they were talking about Panda, and the question was from CyberGhost. Can Panda be used to inject packets?
Yes. Yeah. So the Panda does support packet injection. What it doesn't support are certain channels that were added specifically with 802.11ac. You can think about it as just an 802.11 adapter, but AC obviously has backwards compatibility for those devices.
Okay, perfect. And then the last question was mostly around certifications, right? So I guess they're pretty popular nowadays. And the question was, are there any other certifications other than the offensive security, wireless certification? And I know that GIAC has the GAWN from SANS, but I'm not familiar with any others. Do you know of any other certifications related to just wireless security?
Unfortunately,
those are the only two, right?
Yeah, there's not a ton, and most of my learning has been done outside of the certification track. Like I said, I cannot recommend the wireless CTF enough. There's so many things that you're going to see there that are oddball items that you're never going to see on a normal pen test, but there's going to be situations where they come in extremely helpful. So that would be obviously, once we get out of COVID times, that would be my primary recommendation. As far as certification courses go, I can't speak to either of the two because I haven't taken them. Obviously, SANS usually sets a pretty high bar, so I can't imagine that course is bad. And same with the offensive security course. I don't know if that one's slated to be updated or not. So because I know they're doing a round of updates on all their courses, so maybe wait for the revisions to come out.
Yeah, there is the CWNA test that or certification that I think Udemy has some training on it. Udemy is pretty good. There's some other, I guess, Global Knowledge teaches on that as well. And then there's some other certifications that are not part of like a certification track, but you can get certified in, like in CCNA. There's some wireless specific certifications you can pursue that are part of that.
Excellent. Yeah, and I should mention too, I know in Kali there is, and I don't know what, I think it's Ubuntu in general, but Kali specifically I know has a hardware simulator. So even if you don't have any of these dongles, or the price is too high or whatever the case may be, if you have even a VM, you can simulate radios and perform traffic analysis, attacks, things like that, all from one machine on a simulated wireless network. So
yeah, I've seen that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I use that a lot. And just one other question came in, but to highlight on that is the kernel simulation, hardware simulation for a kernel module. It's Modbus 82.11 HWSIM.
That's
You can actually use and create at least two wireless interfaces, one for your host APD, right? So you can simulate the wireless access point, and then another one for your WPA supplicant. And you can do that. Now, the last question that came in Twitch was, what will be a good long range adapter for long distance like Panda, or how to make it better?
Get closer.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get bigger antennas. I'm sure that there are different power specs for various adapters, but for the most part, proximity is going to be your best friend. And one of the things to mention too, I forgot to mention this in the slides, clients are going to prefer the strongest signal. So if you are the closest signal and you are the strongest signal, you're going to be the one that they connect to. So positioning is usually much more important than your hardware, right? So if you're, it's 8 a.m, maybe the company's using protection so that the only time the client's associate is initially, maybe you go out into the parking lot, right? You wait in the parking lot for people to come in. You're the strongest signal as people are getting out of their car, walking into the office. It's a great time to capture credentials. And again, if you do capture credentials, then you've already got a foothold on the network. So pretty useful.
Absolutely.
But yes, a long way of saying hardware doesn't matter as much as positioning.
Awesome. I think those are the only questions that I see. I'm monitoring both the YouTube and the Twitch channels, and looking at Discord. Yeah, I think those are it. Thank you so much again.
When you do an assessment, do you just use your laptop, or do you have any other special tools you use?
So for wireless, I do have additional tools. I have, depending on what I'm doing, I usually just bring, at a minimum, you're going to need to bring 2 adapters with you in order to stand up Evil Twins and things like that. But no, the alpha cards that I mentioned earlier, those are both great. There is other equipment that I use for other wireless items, so things that are outside the spectrum of Wi-Fi. So like I mentioned before, Hack RF1 is fantastic for anything SDR related. Ubertooth is great for Bluetooth stuff, those sorts of things.
Cool. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bronson. Really appreciate you jumping in and doing this class for everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, no problem. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. And I think that's it for today. As a reminder, of course, you can join the conversation in Discord. All the links are in the bottom of the screen. Whether you're on Twitch or in YouTube, we have the links for pretty much all the entities that are represented here: Red Team Village, Grey Hat, and Texas Cyber. And with that, thank you again, Bronson, and thank you everybody for joining. See you in the next.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Yep.